"You're protecting the real criminal," she shouted, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade. Every head in the courtroom snapped toward her trembling finger, aimed directly at someone no one expected. A man in a crisp suit, sitting confidently in the gallery. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order in the court!" But there was no order. Not anymore. Whispers erupted. The prosecutor's face turned pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. The man she pointed at didn't move. He just stared back, his expression darkening. She wasn't supposed to speak. She wasn't supposed to know. But she did. And what she said next unraveled everything they'd tried to hide. "If you believe in justice, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us, because the truth is about to explode in this courtroom." Her name was Emma Blake, just 18, barely out of high school, but standing in that courtroom with the defiance of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't a lawyer, not part of the defense team. She was just the younger sister of the man they'd thrown behind bars, labeled a killer without a shred of real evidence. Her brother, Daniel Blake, had been sentenced to life for a murder he didn't commit. A robbery gone wrong, a man found dead, and Daniel, at the wrong place, at the wrong time, became their perfect scapegoat. The prosecution painted him as violent, reckless. The evidence, circumstantial. The witnesses, shaky at best. But no one cared. The system had a narrative, and Daniel fit it perfectly. Until Emma dug deeper. Late nights spent poring over case files, police reports riddled with inconsistencies, missing surveillance footage, and one name that kept popping up where it didn't belong: Mark Dalton. A respected businessman, sitting comfortably in court, smirking like none of this could touch him. But now, it was Emma's turn. She wasn't just fighting for her brother's life. She was about to expose the truth, and with the entire courtroom watching, she wasn't backing down. Because the real criminal wasn't Daniel. He was right there, hiding in plain sight. "You're protecting the real criminal," she shouted, pointing directly at someone in the room. The courtroom froze. Whispers rippled through the audience like a sudden gust of wind. Papers rustled, and the judge's gavel slammed down, trying to regain control. But the tension was already unleashed. All eyes turned toward the man she was accusing. A well-dressed figure seated confidently among the spectators, his face a mask of disbelief mixed with faint arrogance. The prosecutor shot up from his seat, his voice sharp. "Objection, Your Honor. This is a baseless outburst meant to distract from the facts of the case." But the judge, his brow furrowed, leaned forward. "Miss Daniels, are you making an official accusation?" She stood tall, her breath steady, despite the pounding in her chest. "I am, because the facts in this case don't point to my client. They point to him." Gasps erupted again. The accused man didn't flinch, but a slight twitch in his jaw betrayed him. The judge's gavel banged once more. "Order! Miss Daniels, proceed, but be very careful. If you're wrong, you'll be held in contempt." She nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered the evidence, the documents she'd spent countless sleepless nights uncovering. "Your Honor, for weeks, the prosecution has painted my client as a criminal, presenting what they call irrefutable evidence. But what if that evidence was planted? What if the real criminal manipulated this entire case?" She turned toward the jury, locking eyes with each of them. "This isn't just about proving my client's innocence. It's about exposing the truth." Then she laid out the first piece of evidence, a surveillance photo, grainy but clear enough to show a shadowy figure near the crime scene. "This footage was dismissed as irrelevant, but look closer. That's not my client. That's him." All eyes snapped back to the man in question. The tension in the room grew thicker with each word she spoke. The accused man shifted in his seat, his once confident posture now rigid. His fingers tapped nervously on the armrest, a small crack in his carefully constructed facade. Miss Daniels wasn't just making an accusation. She was unraveling a lie woven deep into the fabric of the case. She held up a second piece of evidence, a phone record. This is a call log from the night of the crime. It shows a call made from my client's phone. But here's the problem. My client was in custody when this call was placed. She paused, letting that sink in. The phone was in evidence, yet someone accessed it, someone who had the power to do so without raising suspicion. The courtroom was dead silent. She stepped closer to the jury, her voice steady but fierce. That someone is sitting right here. The prosecutor tried to interject, but the judge silenced him with a glare. Let her continue. Miss Daniels walked over to the evidence table, picking up a set of photographs. She displayed them one by one, security footage from the police station, timestamps matching the call log. The images showed the man she'd accused, an officer no less, sneaking into the evidence room. Why would he need to access my client's phone if the case was airtight? She asked, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Because he needed to plant evidence, to frame an innocent person. The man finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly, despite the smugness he tried to maintain. This is ridiculous. I was doing my job. Miss Daniels snapped back. Your job? Or covering your tracks? She then presented the final piece of evidence, a financial transaction linking him to the victim's known associate. A payoff, she whispered, hidden under layers of accounts, but not hidden well enough. The jury members exchanged glances, their skepticism turning into something darker, doubt. The judge leaned forward, his expression hard. Do you have an explanation for this? He asked the accused man, but he had none. Miss Daniels took a deep breath, her heart racing. She'd done it. She'd pierced through the lies, and now the truth was bleeding out for everyone to see. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Gasps, murmurs, and whispers filled the space as the accused officer's face turned ashen. His carefully crafted mask of innocence crumbled under the weight of the evidence laid bare before him. The prosecutor fumbled with his notes, his confidence shaken, desperately searching for a rebuttal. Judge Harper slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in the court! Silence reluctantly settled, the tension so thick it felt like the very walls were closing in. Miss Daniels, unwavering, stepped back into the center of the room, her eyes never leaving the jury. This case was never about justice for the victim, she declared, her voice echoing with conviction. It was about deception, corruption, and betrayal. The system you trusted was manipulated. But today, right now, you have the power to fix that. The accused officer shifted again, sweat glistening at his temples. His defense attorney whispered frantically in his ear, but he waved it off, his composure unraveling. Miss Daniels seized the moment. You see, when people in power abuse their authority, they believe they're untouchable, she continued, walking slowly toward the jury box. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. She paused, letting her words sink in. And sometimes, she added softly, all it takes is one voice, one person brave enough to stand up and say, no more. The jury sat motionless, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and outrage. Even Judge Harper, known for his stoicism, looked visibly shaken. Suddenly, the accused officer stood up, slamming his hands on the table. This is a setup, he shouted, his voice cracking. You have no proof. Miss Daniels turned to him, her gaze sharp as glass. No proof? She held up the financial records, the call logs, the surveillance images. This isn't just proof, it's your downfall. Realizing he was trapped, the officer's arrogance dissolved into desperation. You don't know the whole story, he barked, his voice trembling. Miss Daniels didn't flinch. Oh, I think we do. At that moment, two uniformed officers entered the courtroom, walking purposefully toward the accused. The judge nodded grimly, signaling them forward. You are under arrest for evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit perjury, one officer announced, pulling out handcuffs. The man's face twisted with rage as they restrained him, his defiance giving way to panic. "You'll regret this," he screamed as he was led out of the courtroom. Miss Daniels exhaled deeply, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned back to the jury one last time, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Ladies and gentlemen, now you know the truth. It's up to you to deliver justice." And with that, she returned to her seat, her job done. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. The courtroom remained tense, every eye glued to the door where the verdict would soon emerge. Miss Daniels sat quietly, her hands clasped, her heart racing despite the calm facade she maintained. Finally, the door creaked open. The jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. The foreperson stood, holding the folded piece of paper that contained the fate of the accused. Judge Harper cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreperson nodded. "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom leaned in, collective breath held. In the matter of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit perjury, we find the defendant. A pause thick with anticipation. "Guilty on all counts." The words echoed like a thunderclap. A surge of emotion swept through the room. Relief, triumph, vindication. Miss Daniels closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the weight of the battle lift from her shoulders. Judge Harper nodded solemnly. "Justice has been served." As the convicted officer was led away, his once defiant glare now replaced with hollow defeat, Miss Daniels rose to her feet. She turned to the victim's family, their faces awash with tears. This time, not from grief, but from the fragile hope that had finally found them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. But Miss Daniels didn't stop. She walked past them, her head held high. This wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about the truth. And as she stepped into the cool evening air, she knew one thing for certain. The fight wasn't over. Because for every case like this, there were countless others still buried, still silenced. But not for long. Not if she had anything to say about it. The dust had settled inside the courtroom, but Miss Daniels knew the ripple effects of the verdict would stretch far beyond those walls. The corrupt officer's conviction had exposed more than just his crimes. It had cracked open a system built on silence, fear, and unchecked power. The following days were a whirlwind. Headlines blared with bold letters. "Courtroom shocker. Teenager takes down corrupt cop." Social media erupted, praising Miss Daniels as a symbol of fearless justice. But for her, the real victory was quieter. It was in the tearful hug from the victim's mother who whispered, "You gave me my son back, not in life, but in truth." It was in the letters from strangers, people who'd lost faith in justice, now inspired to fight their own battles. Yet, with recognition came consequences. Threatening messages slipped under her door, whispers of retaliation from those whose secrets she'd dragged into the light. But Miss Daniels stood firm. She'd faced the beast and lived. She wasn't afraid anymore. Sitting at her desk one evening, surrounded by case files and newspaper clippings, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A shaky voice spoke. "I know what you did in court. I need your help. They're trying to bury my case too." Miss Daniels glanced at the stack of files on her desk. Her fight wasn't over. It never would be. She took a deep breath and replied, "Tell me everything." The screen fades to black. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Would you have the courage to stand up for the truth when the world tries to silence you? Because justice doesn't stop with one victory. It's a battle we fight together. See you in the next one.